The phone sits on the table next to my chair, and I find myself looking at it more than I'd like to admit. It's Wednesday afternoon, a little past 3, and the light coming through the window has that particular slant it gets this time of year. I used to love this time of day when the house was full. There was always something happening around 3 o'clock. Kids coming home from school, the burst of noise and energy, backpacks dropped in the hallway, voices calling out about what was for dinner or who took whose jacket. Now it's just quiet. The phone doesn't ring much anymore. When it does, it's usually someone trying to sell me something or a recorded message about my car's extended warranty. I keep the ringer on anyway, just in case. I made myself a cup of tea about an hour ago, and it's gone cold sitting here. I do that a lot now. Make tea and forget to drink it. There's no one to notice. No one to ask if I want a fresh cup. I could get up and make another one, but I probably won't. I'll just sit here with this cold cup until it's time to think about dinner, which is usually something simple these days. Soup from a can, maybe a sandwich. I used to cook big meals every night. Pot roast on Sundays, meatloaf on Wednesdays, chicken and potatoes on Fridays. The kitchen would smell like garlic and onions and whatever was baking in the oven. I'd set the table for 5, sometimes 6 if one of the kids had a friend over. There was always conversation, always someone needing something, always the pleasant chaos of family life. I thought that was how it would always be, or at least that's what I assumed without really thinking about it. You don't imagine an ending when you're in the middle of things. My daughter Susan called last week. It was brief. She was driving somewhere. I could hear the sound of traffic in the background, and she just remembered it was my birthday the next day. She apologized for calling early, but said she'd be in meetings all day Thursday and didn't want to forget. I told her it was fine, that I appreciated the call. We talked for maybe 5 minutes. She asked how I was feeling, if I needed anything, told me about a project at work that was taking up all her time. I asked about the grandkids, and she gave me quick updates. Melissa was doing well in 5th grade. Jason had made the basketball team. Good, I said. That's wonderful. And then there was that little pause that happens when neither of us knew what else to say, and she told me she had to go. She was almost at her destination. She said she'd try to visit soon. I told her not to worry. I knew she was busy. We said goodbye, and that was that. On my actual birthday, I spent the day alone. Susan sent a text message in the afternoon. My son Robert didn't call at all. I married Bill when I was 22 years old. He was 24, working at his father's hardware store, steady and reliable and kind in his quiet way. We met at a church social and dated for a year before he proposed. The wedding was small, just family and close friends, held in the same church where we'd met. We moved into a little rental house on Maple Street, 2 bedrooms and 1 bathroom and a kitchen barely big enough for both of us to stand in at the same time. I worked as a secretary at the insurance office downtown until Susan was born 3 years later. After that I stayed home, which was what you did back then if you could manage it financially. Robert came along 2 years after Susan, and our little house suddenly felt very full. Bill worked long hours at the store. His father was getting older, and Bill was slowly taking over more of the responsibilities. He'd come home tired most evenings, eat dinner, read the paper, watch a little television, go to bed early. Weekends were for yard work and fixing whatever had broken during the week, and sometimes taking the kids to the park if the weather was nice. He was a good father in the way men of his generation were good fathers. He provided. He was present. He didn't raise his voice or his hand. But he wasn't much for talking about feelings or sitting down for long conversations about hopes and dreams. That wasn't his way. I accepted that. I had the children to focus on, the house to manage, the daily routine that kept everything moving forward. Susan was a serious child, always doing well in school, always organized and responsible. She had friends, but not many close ones. She spent a lot of time in her room reading or doing homework. Robert was more outgoing, always had a group of kids around him, played sports, got into minor trouble now and then, but nothing serious. They weren't particularly close with each other despite being only 2 years apart. Susan thought Robert was immature. Robert thought Susan was boring. They tolerated each other the way siblings often do, but there wasn't much warmth between them. I told myself that was normal, that they'd grow closer as adults. Bill didn't seem worried about it one way or the other. I put a lot of energy into being a good mother. I volunteered at their schools, attended every parent-teacher conference, made sure they had clean clothes and healthy meals, and helped with their homework when they needed it. I drove Susan to piano lessons every Tuesday and Thursday for 6 years. I sat through countless basketball games watching Robert play. I organized birthday parties and helped with science projects and listened when I wanted to talk, though Susan rarely wanted to talk, and Robert mostly talked about surface things, whatever game was coming up or which friends he was hanging out with that weekend. I thought I was doing everything right. I thought that by being there, by paying attention, by caring for all their physical needs and showing up for all their activities, I was building something that would last. I thought they'd know how much I loved them, how much they mattered to me. I thought that would be enough. Susan went away to college when she was 18, a state school about 4 hours away. She came home for holidays that first year, less often after that. She met Craig her junior year, and by the time she graduated they were engaged. The wedding was nice, though I remember feeling like I was watching it from a distance somehow, like I was a guest rather than the mother of the bride. They moved to another state for Craig's job. Susan got work as a project manager at some kind of consulting firm. I didn't fully understand what she did, but it seemed important and demanding. They had Melissa 2 years later, Jason 3 years after that. I offered to come help when each baby was born, but Susan said her mother-in-law was already planning to come, and it would be too crowded with both of us there. I sent gifts instead, cards on birthdays, called every few weeks to check in. Robert stayed local, went to community college for a year, then dropped out and started working construction. He married young, a girl named Tracy he'd known in high school. That marriage lasted 3 years and ended badly. There was another girlfriend after that, another after that. He moved around a lot, different apartments, different jobs. Bill worried about him constantly, though he expressed it as frustration rather than concern. Why can't he settle down? Bill would say. Why can't he figure out what he wants to do with his life? I defended Robert, made excuses for him, said he just needed time to find his path. But privately I worried too. I called him more than I called Susan, checking in, making sure he was okay, offering help he usually didn't want or wouldn't accept. Bill died 6 years ago. Heart attack, sudden, no warning. He was 68 years old. One day he was here, the next day he wasn't. Susan flew in for the funeral, stayed 3 days, flew back. Robert came to the service, but seemed uncomfortable the whole time. Left right after without much explanation. There were people at the house after the funeral, neighbors and folks from church, and some of Bill's old friends, bringing casseroles and condolences. But by evening everyone had gone home, and it was just me in this house that suddenly felt enormous and empty. The kids didn't stay. They had to get back to their lives. I understood that. I told them I'd be fine. The years after Bill died have been the loneliest of my life, and I never would have predicted that. I thought loneliness would come from losing my husband, and it did for a while. But the deeper loneliness, the kind that sits in your chest and won't leave, that came from my own children, from the slow realization that I didn't really have a relationship with them anymore. Hadn't for a long time, if I was being honest with myself. Susan calls maybe once a month, always rushed, always distracted. Our conversations follow the same pattern, every time. She asks how I'm doing. I say I'm fine. She tells me she's busy with work and the kids' activities. I say I understand. She promises to visit soon, but soon never comes. Last time she was here was 2 Christmases ago, and that was only for a day because they had to spend the actual holiday with Craig's parents. Robert calls even less frequently. He's better about texting, little messages now and then, but we haven't had a real conversation in months. He came by in the spring to fix my back steps, which were rotting through. Spent maybe an hour here, refused my offer of lunch, left as soon as the job was done. I've tried reaching out more. I called Susan on a random Tuesday a few months back, no particular reason. Just wanted to hear her voice and have a real conversation. She answered, but I could tell I'd caught her at a bad time. She was at the office, Had a meeting in 10 minutes. Could she call me back later? She didn't call back. I tried again the next week, and she didn't answer at all. Sent a text a few hours later, saying she'd been slammed, and would try to call over the weekend. She didn't. I stopped calling unless it was something specific I needed to tell her. Robert's the same way. I invited him for dinner in July. Said I'd make his favorite, pot roast with carrots and potatoes the way I used to make it. He said he'd try to make it, but he was pretty sure he had plans. He didn't show up. Didn't call either. I ate the leftovers for a week. The turning point came last winter. I had a fall. Nothing serious, but it shook me up. I'd gone out to get the mail, and there was ice on the walkway I hadn't seen, and my feet just went out from under me. I lay there on the cold ground for what felt like a long time, trying to catch my breath, making sure nothing was broken. My hip hurt and my wrist hurt where I tried to catch myself, but I could move everything. Eventually I got myself up and back inside. I sat in this same chair I'm sitting in now and realized that no one would have known if I'd been badly hurt. No one was checking on me. No one would have noticed if I hadn't answered the phone for a few days, because no one was calling anyway. I could have died out there on that icy walkway, and it might have been a week before anyone thought to come looking. That's when the loneliness became something I couldn't ignore anymore, something I couldn't pretend wasn't there. I called Susan that evening, told her about the fall. She was concerned, asked if I was hurt, if I needed to go to the hospital. I said no, I was fine, just sore. She said I should be more careful. Maybe I should think about getting one of those alert systems, where you wear a button around your neck. I said maybe I would look into that. Then she had to go. One of the kids needed help with homework. I called Robert next. He didn't answer. I left a message telling him about the fall, saying I was okay, but wanted him to know. He texted back an hour later. Glad you are okay. That was it. 3 words. I've spent a lot of time this past year thinking about how we got here. Not just with the fall, but with everything. How did I end up old and alone when I had children, when I spent decades caring for them and loving them and trying to do right by them? I've thought about all the ways I failed, and there were many. I see that now. I was so focused on the practical aspects of parenting that I missed the emotional ones. I made sure they had everything they needed, but I didn't teach them how to connect, how to be present with each other, how to maintain relationships that required effort and vulnerability. Bill and I didn't model that because we didn't know how to do it ourselves. We were good people doing our best, but our best had limitations we didn't recognize at the time. I think about all the conversations we never had, all the times I could have asked them how they were really feeling instead of just how school was going or whether they'd finished their chores. I think about how I let Susan pull away because she was self-sufficient and didn't seem to need me much, and how I probably made Robert feel like he was always disappointing me by worrying so much about his choices. I think about how I never told them directly that they were the most important thing in my life, that everything I did was because I loved them more than anything. I assumed they knew. I assumed love would be enough without the words, without the deeper connection that requires showing up emotionally and not just physically. But I also think about them, about their choices as adults, about the way they've let me fade into the background of their lives. They're busy, yes. They have careers and families and responsibilities. I understand that. But everyone's busy. That's not really an excuse. Not when we're talking about a phone call once a week or visiting a few times a year. They've decided, whether consciously or not, that maintaining a relationship with their mother isn't a priority. That hurts more than I want to admit. I raised them. I was there every day of their childhood. And now I'm an obligation they fulfill minimally, a task they check off their list when guilt gets too heavy. I don't tell them any of this. When we do talk, I keep things light. I ask about their lives, tell them little bits about mine. Never burden them with the truth of how lonely I am or how much I wish things were different. What would be the point? They'd probably feel bad for a little while, might call more often for a few weeks, but then things would drift back to how they are now. You can't make people want to be close to you. You can't force connection that isn't there. And maybe it isn't there anymore. Maybe it dissolved so slowly over so many years that there's nothing left to build on. I've thought about moving to assisted living, one of those places where there are other people around activities, and meals in a common dining room. At least I wouldn't be alone all the time. But this is my home. Bill and I bought this house 40 years ago, raised our children here, built a life here. The thought of leaving feels like giving up on something, though I'm not sure what exactly. Maybe just giving up on the hope that things will change, that my children will suddenly realize I'm still here and I won't be forever, that they'll want to spend time with me while they still can. But hope doesn't change reality. Reality is Wednesday afternoons with cold tea and a phone that doesn't ring. Sometimes I wonder if other mothers feel this way. If this is a common experience, growing old and finding that the children you devoted your life to have drifted so far away they might as well be strangers. I think about my own mother, gone now for 15 years, and realize I didn't call her as often as I should have either in those last years of her life. I was busy with my own family, my own responsibilities. I thought there would be more time. There wasn't. Now I'm on the other side of that equation, and I see how it must have felt for her. The loneliness doesn't come from being alone physically. It comes from being forgotten by the people who are supposed to matter most. From knowing your children have lives full of other people and other priorities, and you're not really part of any of it anymore. You're just someone they call out of obligation a few times a year. Someone they'll feel guilty about when you're gone, but not guilty enough to act differently while you're still here. I don't know what the lesson is in all this, if there is one. Maybe just that family doesn't stay together automatically, that you have to work at it all the way through, not just when children are young and need you, but when they're adults living their own lives. You have to make time for each other, make the effort to stay connected even when it's inconvenient, even when you're tired and busy and pulled in a dozen different directions. You have to decide that the relationships matter enough to prioritize them. I didn't teach my children that. I didn't know I needed to. And now here I am, sitting in a quiet house with a phone that doesn't ring, understanding too late what was missing all along. The light is fading now, that particular quality of late afternoon shifting into early evening. Soon I'll get up and make myself some dinner, probably that soup I mentioned earlier. I'll eat it at the kitchen table with the television on for company. I'll clean up and maybe read for a while before bed. Tomorrow will be the same, and the day after that. This is what my life is now. I never thought loneliness would come from my own family, but that's exactly where it came from. Not from bad people or deliberate cruelty, but from good people who drifted away and never drifted back. From children who grew up and forgot to bring their mother along into their adult lives. From a lifetime of love that somehow wasn't enough to build the kind of connection that lasts. I don't have answers for why it happened or how to fix it. I just have the truth of it, sitting here with me in this quiet room, in this quiet life, waiting for a phone that probably won't ring.